to another episode of Well, Don't Tell the Kids. I'm Janet Lee, your host, and today my guest is Suzanne Whang. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Suzanne.
I'm so excited to talk to you, Janet. It's been a long time.
Suzanne joins us from Los Angeles for a conversation, but I see you didn't, like most of my guests, didn't start out in California, but you were over here near the nation's capital. Is that right?
Correct. I was born in Arlington, Virginia, close to Washington, D.C. Where are you living now?
So Northern Virginia.
So, yes.
Northern Virginia.
So I was born in Arlington, and then we lived briefly in McLean, and then my parents moved us to Reston, Virginia. But my dad was an engineer for the Navy, so I'm a military brat. Even though I was born in Virginia, we moved to San Francisco, one of my favorite cities on earth. Then we moved to Honolulu, Hawaii. Then we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts when my dad was getting a PhD at MIT. And then we moved back to Virginia. So I went to, I don't know, maybe 7 different elementary schools and went to junior high school and high school back in Virginia.
Well, we go back a long ways as family friends, but
we do.
A lot about you.
It's weird for you to call me Suzanne, probably because you always knew me as Susie.
I know, but we're gonna do this formally. All right, I'll call you Susie if you'd like.
It's fine. Either way, it's fine with me.
Reston is one of the first planned communities, along with Columbia, Maryland. Yeah, and I just think that that's interesting that you come from a planned community. I mean, it's lovely there, but
I know it's very strange because my life certainly doesn't fit into any sort of utopian planned little box. Interestingly enough. And after I graduated high school, I went to Herndon High School in Herndon, Virginia. Right. And then I went to Yale undergrad and got a bachelor's degree in psychology. And then I went to Brown University and got a master's degree specializing in cognitive psychology. And then I moved to Boston, which is where I became an actor. And then I moved to New York City, which is where I became a television host. And then I moved to Los Angeles, which is where I became a stand-up comedian and a writer and a teacher and a coach and a political activist and a metaphysical minister. So there's been many things that have happened in
you
LA.
answered all of my questions there. I was going to walk us through your path. But let's back up just a little bit. So you started in psychology and then continued on into cognitive psychology. Can you just briefly describe cognitive psychology for us? What went into that decision process where you kept on going? And it must be, maybe you can tell us if it has any relation to your acting or your current incarnation.
Yes, it absolutely does, but I didn't know it at the time. I had an amazing psychology teacher in high school, believe it or not. I went to such an amazing high school. The Fairfax County Public School System, at least at the time that I was there, was really high quality. And the fact that I would be offered a psychology class in high school was thrilling. I had a teacher named Mrs. Whitman, had salt and pepper curly hair and wore cat-eye glasses. And she sort of talked like this, a little bit like Julia Child. She was very kooky, and she was fantastic. And she taught us things about optical illusions and visual perception and kinophantoscopes and all these. It was just fascinating. Her class, I loved her class so much. And then I went to Yale, and I thought I was going to be a math major, honestly, at Yale because I was so good at math. I did way better on the math part of the SATs than I did on the verbal. I got to Yale, and frankly, the teachers weren't very good, and I wasn't impressed. I wasn't interested. And when it comes to math, at least at the time, I went there a long time ago in 1983, they didn't impress me. However, I went through the course book looking for courses that I wanted to take, and I realized that I had circled almost every single psychology class, any type of psychology, clinical psychology, developmental psychology, social psychology, cognitive psychology, everything. I found it all fascinating. Normal psychology, developmental psychology. So that's how my new major was born. It was just because I had obviously this huge appetite and interest for all the psychology courses. And then I informally minored in art history because Yale also has an incredible art history department. So most of my time was spent fulfilling the distribution requirements, but then taking every psychology and art history class that I could get my hands on. So that's how that all began. And then I loved it so much. And honestly, I started Yale when I was 16, and I started graduate school when I was 20. So I skipped a couple of grades. Somewhere along the way of moving around a lot and being in open school systems, maybe like Montessori. I don't know what happened, but...
Did you just say Montessori?
Yes.
I'm teaching at a Montessori, but anyway, go ahead.
Oh, fantastic. So I think that maybe there was an open system where it wasn't so rigid about what grade you were in. And the next thing I knew, when I got back to Virginia, I was 2 years ahead of everybody in my cognitive development. And so I think it's a tough thing for parents, honestly, when you have a child that's very bright and your choices are, do I let them skip 2 grades and be 2 years younger than all of their classmates and not at the same developmental social level? Or do I hold them back so that they're with people their age, but then they're bored out of their mind? And my parents chose to let me skip the grades. And I think that that probably had a huge effect on me, because in a certain way, I'm glad that I wasn't bored in school. And I loved school, and I loved Yale so much that I couldn't think at the age of 20 of entering the quote-unquote real world and getting a job. I was so good at school, and I loved school, so I thought I'd go to more school. And cognitive psychology, it was almost like it blended my math and science-oriented mind with my creative psychology fascination, blending the 2 hemispheres of my brain, because cognitive psychology is the most quantitative of all the branches of psychology. At least it was at the time, where we are studying the senses, vision, perception, attention, memory, lobes of the brain, speech recognition, language acquisition, aphasia. You know, it was all fascinating to me, and the implications for artificial intelligence, it was all fascinating to me. How does all of that work? How does long-term memory work? How does short-term memory work? How does the brain function? How are all those cognitive processes working in conjunction? I found that all fascinating, and so that's why I focused on cognitive.
Do you draw upon that?
Absolutely. Anybody who studies psychology is interested in human behavior, human thought processes, how the mind and the body interact, how people interact with each other. The social psychology, anthropology, sociology, all of that fascinates me. How the brain and the mind and the spirit process trauma, how we process challenges, how we process grief. I just find all of it thrilling, and I absolutely use it every day, whether I'm doing an acting job or writing a script or teaching people, because everyone needs to be taught differently. If you teach, you know that you cannot teach every student the same way. Visually, some are auditory, some are kinesthetic, some need a lot of discipline and structure, some need you to back off and give them freedom. And with things like dyslexia, so many children that are dyslexic, they think that they're stupid because they're not doing well on the standardized tests, when in fact, I'm sure you know this, most dyslexic students are above average intelligence. It has nothing to do with being stupid in any way.
You then got to Boston. I wanted to know when the dramatic bug first bit you and how.
Yes. Well, it didn't formally bite me, I suppose, until I got to Boston. But, you know, I grew up with a family of, my dad sings, my mom and dad both sang in the church choir.
Yes.
My sister sings. My sister plays bass, and her husband plays guitar and every instrument, and they sing. And
great performers.
Yes, my parents are ballroom dancers. My dad would MC events and tell jokes and be the life of the party, and he would sing and tell jokes and tell stories. And so I grew up with a performer father, and my paternal grandfather was a famous Korean minister, Hwang Chae-kyung Moksanim, and he traveled the world preaching. He was a Korean Presbyterian minister, and he was controversial for using humor in his sermons. Some of the Korean congregation did not like that. They would say, church no funny, but he would say, only way get people stay awake every Sunday. He was great. I loved him. And he also collected ancient musical instruments from all over the world. Apparently, I think he had 60 different instruments, and he learned how to play at least one song on every one of these collection of amazing instruments from all the different countries he visited. And
wow.
He was the host of a Voice of America radio show, which is the U.S. government's radio network. And so I grew up listening to musical soundtracks and Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole, and this is what I grew up with all the time. And I played piano for 7 years, and so I did a play. I did plays in elementary school. I think I did 2 musicals in high school. I did The Boyfriend and Bye Bye Birdie, and then at Yale I did Guys and Dolls. So I was acting and singing and dancing, but just as a hobby because, you know, in the Korean handbook, when you raise a girl, at least a generation, I could become a doctor, a lawyer, a professor, or an engineer. And acting and singing and dancing is something that you do for fun. Oh, isn't that a cute hobby, right? So I never thought of it that way. But then a couple of things happened. When I was, I think, 17 years old, I think I just finished my first year at Yale, and I was home for summer vacation. I think the church organist at the church that we went to as a family had a friend who worked at the Educational Film Center in Virginia. And the friend at the Educational Film Center in Virginia was looking for a teenage Asian girl to play a part in a short film as an actor. And so I went and auditioned for this thing. It was a 15-minute educational short film. It was called Side by Side. It was, interestingly enough, about racism. It was about me in high school and my best friend who was Caucasian, and we were supposed to double date for the prom. And my best friend's boyfriend, who was Caucasian, and my boyfriend was Asian. My best friend's boyfriend wanted to go to dinner at a country club that was exclusively white and did not allow Asians. And so my best friend was feeling really torn. It turns into a big fight. There's a huge conflict, and then the film ends. And it was to be used as an educational tool in schools to show students this 15-minute short film that ends with the conflict, where they're having a huge fight because my character cannot believe that her character is even considering excluding me and going with her boyfriend to the exclusive country club when we had plans to double date for the prom. I auditioned for it. I had never auditioned for anything on camera before, and I booked it, and I shot it, and the amazing thing about it is that it ended up being shown on PBS on television. Why would that be? Because it was only 15 minutes long. Most things on television, they have to be 30 minutes long. They must have combined it with something else that was 15 minutes long. But it was shown on PBS, and it got nominated for an Emmy Award.
Get out.
Program did. And it was up against a 1-hour-long Julie Andrews special. So, of course, we did not win. But the fact that the first thing I ever auditioned for, a short film, is something that I booked that was only meant for schools that ended up on television that got nominated for an Emmy Award was pretty spectacular, and it was an auspicious beginning. Although then I went right back to finish out my years at Yale, and I went to Brown, and I didn't really think about acting. I never shot anything after that. But then after Brown, I was in a PhD program, but I was really unhappy at Brown. So I took a leave of absence, knowing full well that I never wanted to go back. And I moved to Boston, and I was temping because I can type really fast. I can type about 100 words a minute. I was with a temp agency, and the place that they sent me to the first time to type for a couple of weeks, the guy that was my boss looked at my resume and said, "You're so overqualified for this temp job. We need an associate at this healthcare consulting firm. We need a marketing research associate who can collect data and statistically analyze it, do focus groups and interviews and survey research and interview people about healthcare issues." And so I got a job. It was my only 9-to-5 job that I've ever had. It was called JSI, John Snow Incorporated, in Boston. And so for 2 years I had a 9-to-5 job. And what happened was after a couple of years, I'm in a cubicle. I'm doing good work. It's good cause work. We did AIDS research and Planned Parenthood projects, and it was it was good. But I was listening.
My imagination is going in overdrive here. I'm like imagining you in a cubicle. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, me in a cubicle, behaving myself.
That's good.
Actually, I didn't really behave myself. I would go walk around barefoot and be a little bit crazy. So I'm sure it didn't surprise anybody that I ended up leaving. But I was listening to the radio in my little cubicle, and they announced that they were having a casting call for extras for the television series Spencer for Hire, starring Robert Urich drama, an hour-long pop drama. Sort of like NYPD Blue. This took place in Boston, Spencer for Hire. So I thought, oh, that sounds fun. Be an extra. Those are those people that are in the background of a TV show. So I took a long lunch and went and stood in line at Government Center Plaza. I don't know if you know Boston. But there were so many people standing in this line waiting to sign up, everybody and their grandmother and their dog, everybody who just wanted to do extra work. So anyway, I had to fill out, I think they took a Polaroid picture of me, and I had to fill out a card that said, my height and my weight and my clothing sizes and things like that. About a month later, I got a phone call from the casting director, Ann Baker, and she said, would you like to come and do extra work on Spencer for Hire tomorrow? And I said, sure. I must have called in sick the night before from work, and I was all excited. I'm going to go do extra work on Spencer for Hire. And this is back in the day. There were no cell phones, so this is 1980-something. And I'm not a morning person. I'm nocturnal. And so I had set my alarm clock radio that was plugged into the wall to wake up at something like 5:30 a.m. because I don't know if you know, but oftentimes you have to wake up very early and you're there for 14 hours to shoot a television series that's an hour long. So I wake up the next morning to the sound of my home phone ringing. And I pick up the phone and I hear a very angry Ann Baker saying, Suzanne, this is Ann Baker. Are you planning to show up for work this morning? And I look at my clock radio, and it is flashing something like 3:30 a.m., meaning that the power, and luckily I can wake up and be pretty lucid quickly. So I said, oh, my God, my alarm clock radio is flashing 3:30 a.m. The power must have gone out in my building. I am never late. I'm so sorry, please, the location is so close to where I live. Please let me still come. And she says, you better get here so fast. And she slams the phone down. This is back when you could slam the phone down because it was a physical phone. And so I thought, oh, no. And then I wish there had been a video camera of what happened in the next 5 minutes, because I got out of bed and must have run around like a crazy person. I'm sure I was supposed to bring a lot of different wardrobe choices. I don't know what I was wearing, and I was just running down the street because the location was actually walking distance from my apartment in Boston. And I get there, and luckily, if you also know about the way this works, there's a lot of waiting around, so nothing had even happened yet. So I didn't actually miss any shooting, but I went and sent a dozen roses to Ann Baker to apologize and make up for that, which worked because she ended up casting me in many, many things throughout my career in Boston. So I get there, and I'm fascinated because there are so many people on the crew and in the background, and there's so much equipment set up, and I've been watching TV my whole life, but I had no idea what went in to the making of a television show. So I was just absorbing it like a sponge. I found it incredible. And then a man named Arnie Cox, who has recently passed away, I'm sad to say, guardian angel, he was probably 30 years older than I was. He was a character actor in Boston. He came over to me. At the time, there were probably 50 actors in all of Boston. I am not exaggerating. And everybody knew each other. It was a very small, intimate community of actors. And so it was a really warm, friendly environment with, very few actors who all knew each other. And so Arnie says to me, who are you? And I said, my name is Suzanne. And he says, hi, I'm Arnie. And he said, how come I haven't seen you around? And I said, oh, no, I have a real job, which was funny because I insulted him without even realizing it.
Yeah, making friends there, Suzanne.
Saying, I have a real job. I'm just doing this as a lark for the fun of it today. But he wasn't fazed by that at all. And he says, listen to me. I'm going to write down 10 things for you to do on this piece of paper. You do these 10 things, and you will be acting all the time in Boston, I promise you. And something inside me said, trust him. And he knew that at the time, of the 50 actors in Boston, maybe 5 of them were Asian, and 3 of them were female, and all 3 of them had thick accents. And so he just knew that in anything like a corporate video, an industrial, a commercial, anything that came to town that they wanted diversity for, I would just clean up. He was right. Within a month, I had quit my job. I was in Screen Actors Guild. I was making a living as an actor, and I had never taken an acting class. It was all just from a knack for it. And so as a Korean, I started to panic because we're taught, you have to study to be something and then you become it. You don't become it and then study. So I started frantically studying and taking acting classes because I wanted to feel legitimate. And so I had to catch up to what was happening in my career. But truly, I knew that it was for me because I think I booked 95% of the things I auditioned for in Boston, which I didn't know any differently. I didn't know that usually is not what happens. Well, but that's how my career began.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to say for our listening audience that if Suzanne's voice sounds familiar, she has been the host of House Hunters International and House Hunters, and she co-hosted TV's Censored Bloopers with the late, great Dick Clark. And I'm going to say these nouns to you. I want you to tell me if they tie together at all for you. Doctor, anchorwoman, or doctors, anchorwoman, wedding planner, prison gang leader, and spa manager. Do these have anything to do with you, Suzanne? And if so, is there a favorite?
Yes, I have a few favorites. One of my favorites is I played Polly on NBC's Las Vegas with James Caan, Josh Duhamel, Vanessa Marcel. And one of the reasons that that's one of my favorites is because I created a stand-up comedy alter ego named Sung-hee Park, who's fresh off the boat from Korea. She's never done stand-up before, and she's terrified, and she doesn't speak English very well, and she's naive and innocent. And it is my satire, it's my parody about racism and stereotypes and prejudice in America by becoming a character who is unwittingly being offensive. She has no idea that the things that she's saying are offensive because there's a big culture clash. It's sort of like Lucille Ball and Lenny Bruce meet Archie Bunker from All in the Family because Archie Bunker is this lovable character, but he says these terrible things, and it's not even necessarily coming from malice. It's coming from ignorance. I won a couple of comedy festivals doing this character, but what's amazing about the way the universe works in my paradigm is that my creation of that character absolutely led to this role on NBC's Las Vegas, which was a character who said really offensive things and was an immigrant and was really charming, but she could clear a room with the stuff that would come out of her mouth because she really didn't have a filter. And that was the part. And so in the very first episode, my character was the spa manager of the Montecito Casino and Hotel that was owned by James Caan's character. So my character's name was Polly. And Vanessa Marcel, who is famous for General Hospital, she played Brenda. She won an Emmy Award. She's been on many things since then. But she plays my boss. And in the scene, Vanessa comes to me. Her character's name is Samantha, and I'm Polly. And she comes up to me and she says, Polly, we got a complaint about you that you overcharged some woman for her bikini wax. And I say, what name? And she says, Mrs. Avital. And I say, no overcharge. She hairy like a man. I have to go all the way around corner, clean basement. And that was the whole part. And I remember being at home reading the script, laughing out loud, thinking, oh, this is my Sung-hee Park character. I feel sorry for any other actress who's going to this audition today because I already know that this part is mine. I can feel it in my bones. Right. And indeed, I walked in and I got a call back and I booked the part. It turned out to be one of my favorites is because I get to the set. I've never met Vanessa before, but I had watched her on General Hospital. She's considered the most beautiful woman in the world by many people. who have ever seen her in anything or seen her in person. Anyway, she's one of the series regulars on the show, and I'm supposed to come on just for a day. I just have a few lines. I have one small scene in this television show. And I show up, and she's very friendly, and we're making each other laugh, and we're having a great time, and we're sitting on the floor, and we're running lines, and she's asking me advice about what to do about her boyfriend. And I just think she's a really open, sweet, funny, wonderful person. And she knows that I'm a stand-up comedian. And anyway, then we shoot the scene, and because it's a 3-camera shoot, which if you don't know what that means, it means that there's 3 different cameras that are shooting different angles all at the same time. If it goes well, you have all the coverage you need. You don't have to stop and reposition all the lights.
Over and over again.
Yeah, you don't have to do it over and over again. So it can all happen very fast. So we did it in a couple of takes, and we were done. And so the director yelled, "Okay, cut that. Let's move on to the next location." And Vanessa says, "Hang on a second, Robbie. Suzanne's a stand-up comedian. Why don't you give her a free take and let her ad-lib and improvise the scene for one go-through?" And he said, "Oh, okay, sure." And I thought to myself, what is happening?
So generous.
That never happens. It never happens that the beautiful star, the beautiful female star of a show, wants to give another beautiful female actor more of a chance to shine, to outshine, to be funny, even funnier. And so I went to town. I mean, I come from a background of improv comedy, which I started doing in Boston with a troupe called the Angry Tuxedos. I performed improv comedy in comedy clubs. So I love being able to improvise. So I went crazy. I mean, I said stuff that I knew that they would never put in the show. But the crew guys, who usually don't pay any attention to what's going on, dropped their newspapers and coffee and gave me a standing ovation when I was finally done.
Wow.
And I just thought, wow, that's going to go down in history as one of my favorite days on a set. And then Vanessa and I exchanged information, and then I left, and I didn't really think anything about it. Little did I know that from the next day, starting the next day, Vanessa would take each new script for the following week and go to the writers and say, this is where the Polly character should be in this scene, and she and I should be friends and enemies, and here's how what the plot could be, because Vanessa wanted me back on set. She wanted me back on set because she really loved me as a person, but she also knew that it would make the whole show better. So next thing you know, that one-day 4-line part turned into a recurring guest star for 4 seasons on that television series. And so what's great about that, too, is that somehow the powers that be were told, I don't know if you know, but every episode of a show tends to be directed by a different person and written by a different person, which doesn't seem to make sense. You would think that you would want consistency. It's always the same writers and always the same director on a show, but it wasn't. But somehow every time I would be on an episode, the director and the writer were told that once we're done with the NBC-approved take that was on the paper, that I was to be given a free take to improvise an ad-lib for every single scene I was in. So I was being treated like I was Robin Williams or Jim Carrey or Eddie Murphy. It was so much fun, and I would say the most outrageous things. And because my character is an immigrant, and I wouldn't use bad words, I would just say really racy or inappropriate things. Every Friday night at 9 p.m., I would watch the show, crossing my fingers that some crazy thing that I ad-libbed would end up in the show, and every time something I ad-libbed would end up in the show. And I would get phone calls from friends and family all over the country saying, what is happening? Are the NBC censors not watching this show? How do you get away with this? So I really had the time of my life, and Vanessa became my best friend. So we've been best friends for about 10 years now. In fact, we just got back from a road trip up to Northern California.
So I wanted to shift gears, but thank you again for sharing that amazing story. I'm going to read a quote to you that you provided. If you can speak to it, if you feel like it. If you don't, understand.
Sure.
But Suzanne quoted Maya Angelou, which a lot of folks turn to for inspiration and wisdom. The quote is, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you."
Yeah.
So that just jumped out at me, and I'm like, I'm going to ask Suzanne about this.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2006, and it came back 3 times, and by the time the third time came around, it had progressed to stage 4. It's a very long story, but I had stage 4 breast cancer, and in 2011, I was given 6 months to live. I completely reversed it through a long story that I'm writing a book about now, but I do stand-up comedy about it. I do keynote speeches about it. I do metaphysical sermons about it. And I am now happier and healthier than I was before I ever got cancer. So it's been a magnificent journey. But the most important thing that I want to tell people is that the way that I grew up in what I perceive as Korean culture in general is that you do not talk about your problems or anything from your past that was traumatizing or you might consider shameful or bad or wrong, because that's considered tacky and low class and really just disgusting. You should just put on a smiling, happy face and pretend everything's perfect. No, don't worry, everything perfect. Just smile and cover your mouth. And so that's what I did. For the first 5 years that I had breast cancer, and I'm in the public eye, I kept it a secret. I felt ashamed. I felt like a failure. I thought that only angry people or terrible people got cancer, or cigarette smokers, or I didn't feel good about it. I felt like I was somehow to blame and I was bad and I was wrong, so I didn't talk about it. I thought, after I cure myself, then I'll talk about it. And my boyfriend at the time said, wait, you're always talking about how life is about the journey, not the destination. You should share with people what you're going through right now, because you're handling it with humor and courage and honesty, and I think that people need you now. So why don't you walk your walk? And I learned in a 12-step program that I belong to that we are only as sick as our secrets. It was truly, literally killing me to keep it a secret and be ashamed of it and not open myself up to all the love and support and help and resources that I really needed. And so that goes along with I was bearing an untold story inside of me. And it was a huge story, and it was an important story, and it was a really intense story, and I was being told in this story that I was going to die, and I did not accept that. In the coming out of the cancer closet, some people come out of the closet as being gay. I had to come out of the cancer closet, and I did an NBC News interview, and I did a press release, and I cracked my heart open, and I received such a tsunami of love and support from friends and family members and fans all over the country and all over the world. I got resources. I got prayers. I got funny things. I got people uplifting me. I got resources shared with me and financial help. I went $500,000 into debt from the cancer treatments that were not covered by insurance, because I also did Eastern medicine and alternative treatments and revolutionary treatments, and I left the country, and I did illegal treatments. I did anything that I researched that made sense to me. I took control of my own path, and I didn't leave it all up to one doctor or one paradigm. I was quite literally loved back to life, and it's because I decided to tell my story and no longer bear that agony.
Can you say that in your own voice, Maya Angelou's quote, and we can close there?
Sure. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you.
So you have a new project coming out, Suzanne, and it is, what is it called again?
I'm starring in my first movie. It is called A Weekend with the Family, and it debuted on Netflix on April 1st of 2017, and I would love for people to watch it.
For that, I assume it's a comedy?
It is.
Okay. That's about all the time we have for now. Thank you again for your conversation, Suzanne.
Thank you. It was so nice talking to you, Janet.
And thank you all for listening. My guest today has been Suzanne Whang, and I'm Janet Lee. And please stay tuned for more episodes of Well, Don't Tell the Kids.